I want to try and touch on barriers, and I think you yourself going through 2010 election, or even getting the nomination from the Conservative Party, there must have been barriers that you must have faced.
I mean,
but it's about how were you able to overcome those barriers, because some of the mindset is around there's too much barriers in front of me, like whether it's from within the party or whether external, or what is the image that I'm going to represent.
I think in life, generally, I mean, it's not just a racial or ethnic background issue. There are a lot of barriers generally to anything. And what I think distinguishes people is people who have the resilience to carry on and not get knocked back. As a friend of mine said, he's a journalist, he said, if you actually, and he did a biography of Margaret Thatcher, Charles Moore, and he said, if you actually distill what made her successful, what makes a really successful politician of any description, is that ability just to keep going. You get knocked back and you keep going, you keep going. And I certainly took that approach in 2010. Look, I went for a lot of seats, and sometimes I say, oh, you're very charming, but I don't think your face quite fits, or you charm the committee, and but it's not right for here, all this sort of stuff. And I just kept going. And I was lucky enough, I think, to finally get the seat. And I was struck when I read the Thatcher biography. She had exactly, I mean, obviously she wasn't black, so it was slightly different. But as a woman in the Conservative Party in 1959, when she tried to get a seat, it was quite difficult. And she was in a situation where there are a whole lot of people who'd fought in the war, they were guys with good war records, and they were always getting selected. But she managed to get one. And I think, but what I would say is that I think a lot of those barriers now are lower. They're still there. There's still prejudices there, and that they haven't gone away. But they're lower than was the case 20 years ago or 30 years ago. So I think you're going into a better environment. And in fact, as the community is more settled in Britain, the influence is not going to get less. Okay. So, I think it's about time that we get more engaged, if you like.
I know you're a member of the Free Enterprise Group, and I was just wondering what that group and the Tory party in general is doing to reach out more to ethnic minorities, especially in the black community. I mean, the Tories are the most business-friendly party when it comes to markets, when it comes to job creation, and the black community is very business orientated, has a lot of aspirations to own businesses, to start companies, but there's also a lot of despair about people starting small businesses which then fail, or people feeling that there are too many barriers. So I just wanted to ask you what you feel the Tory party and the Free Enterprise Group can do to reach out to ethnic minorities.
I think there are two issues here. The Conservative Party is traditionally a party of business, particularly small business. And we've been lowering taxes, and we've been talking about that. We could do a bit more, I think, in that regard. I think with regard to the ethnic population, a black vote, whatever you want to call it, I think the party is not performing as well as it should do for a variety of reasons. With regard to the Free Enterprise Group, I think, we could do more, but we're a very small subset of the Conservative Party. But you're absolutely right. I think in this country there's a rising generation of entrepreneurs from immigrant communities who have an enormous amount of dynamism that we haven't even begun to tap into. And I think we could do more. I mean, I wish that the Conservative Party, will win a huge majority at the next election. I think it's very difficult. But I think unless we actually do some of the things you've suggested, we're not going to do that. So, in short, I would just say we could do a lot more, and we're not doing enough.
What's your advice to people who are probably who are more on the streets, but then who believe that politics might be it for them?
I think not just the Conservative Party, but the Labour Party, the parties in Britain have a real problem trying to bring people into them. And I think we've got a model which is out of date. I mean, currently, to join the Conservative Party, you have to spend £25 a year, which is a lot of money. And once you pay the £25, it's very unclear what you get back. Yeah, you can go to coffee mornings and have maybe a raffle ticket, whatever. But that's a model from about 1950, okay? So what we need to do is, as parties, is move towards a more kind of direct engagement. So maybe you might pay £1 a year or a nominal fee, and then we could organise events. You get onto email mailing lists, you get involved in campaigns. So what I would say to the person in Derby is I would look around the internet and see what you can get. But certainly from my side, inside the party, I think there's a lot more, we need to reform this thing. Because as you say, it's very difficult to get involved. And my problem with the Conservative Party, speaking freely, is that we're very regionally centred around London and the South East. I've often wondered, if I were a Conservative in Middlesbrough, an ordinary person, let's say ordinary guy, maybe 18 years old, how do I get involved in the Conservative Party? And I think that's quite difficult. So what I would say is, from where you are, get onto the internet, work out who the local MP is, work out what campaign he or she is getting involved in, of whichever party, and then contribute in that way. So with the internet, there's huge amounts of information. On the other side, I think the parties aren't doing enough to modernise and reach out.
You said that the parties need to do more. You say that the parties need to engage more with young people, particularly young black people. And I imagine we're here because, the ethnic minority vote is going to become a swing vote in the next election, for example. But what are the parties doing? More is great, but what exactly are the parties doing, specifically, to mobilise black young people like ourselves?
I think with the Conservative Party, it's not a young people's issue. The Conservative Party has historically had a problem with the ethnic minority vote. That's a fact. And with regard to that, I think there's a lot of attention in central office to people. There's a man called Alok Sharma, who's of a Hindu background, and he's now vice chairman of the party. And his job is to engage with community leaders and to get people, as it were, on side. Now, this was very successfully done in Canada by the centre-right party in Canada. And what they did was they just essentially forced themselves to engage with people. And it wasn't just a gimmick or a one-week thing or a one-month thing. They did it over years. And in Canada, if you analyse the actual voting patterns there, you will see that a lot of the people of immigrant backgrounds vote for the centre-right parties. And this isn't something that's going to be solved in one election campaign. It'll take 5-10 years. And my last thought on that is that, sorry, I'm just looking at I'm going to have to head off quite soon. My last thought on that is that we don't think strategically enough. We're always thinking about the next soundbite, the next week, the next month, the next election. But the only way to solve this is by having a 5 or 10 year plan of engagement. And that's something which I'm very interested in trying to develop. And we don't think strategically enough in addressing the point you've raised.
Just wondering, you said you're an MP. I'm not sure if your background is from the education department, but I'm wondering if there's any way that the Conservative government would be considering the tuition fees.
I think tuition fees are here to stay, unfortunately, for some, and largely as a function of the budget. When my parents were at university, I think 6% of the people went to university, so everything was paid for. Obviously, in a climate where you have nearly 40%, 45%, that becomes a much bigger commitment from the budget. And we entered the government in 2010 with this enormous deficit. So I don't think even the Labour Party is saying, or certainly not the Labour Party, they introduced the tuition fees in 2005, and it was one of the bravest things they did. That was the biggest revolt, I think, that whole Parliament. And we said that we would look at it, and the Liberal Democrats said that they would abolish it, thinking that they weren't going to get into government. And actually, Danny Alexander said, we can't sign anything because it might be a hung Parliament. We might have to be in government, but they signed it anyway. And of course, when they came into government, they pushed the tuition fees up, having said that they would get rid of it. And if you looked at the polls, they went down 5 points. They were 23 points at the election. They went down to 18, 16 when the coalition was formed. And then when the tuition bill was passed in 2010, they went down to 10 points. They've been flatlining ever since in the polls. So it would be irresponsible and wrong for any party to say that they would get rid of the tuition fees.
With the predicted rise in immigration and the rise in the birth population within the UK and London, how can you ensure that underprivileged people and people in black and ethnic minority can still have an even playing field with the upper class in terms of there's not enough primary schools and secondary schools within London, UK to meet the growing demand?
I've paid a lot of attention to the underachievement of black children over the years. And the key thing, actually, is what happens at primary school. Because a lot of children, particularly black boys, their trajectory of failure starts in primary school. And it's often harder to turn it around when they're in secondary school. And if you go into schools, and I go into schools a lot, and you talk to teachers, they take it for granted that on average, black children will do worse than white children. Nice, bleeding heart white teachers, been on anti-racist marches, the whole 9 yards. But they will say, kind of, well, what do you expect? What do you expect? They seem to think there is something innate why black children at primary school level fail. I've been into primary school classes and seen teachers ignore black boys with their hands up to take somebody else. So I think with primary schools in London, they need to be set targets. They need to be set targets at a primary school level to reduce the achievement gap between black and white children. And by whatever means necessary, extra classes, whatever, they need to close that achievement gap, because you know, and you will know this, when black and Asian children join the school system at age 5, they're doing kind of the same. In fact, black children sometimes are doing a little bit better because they tend to be more developmentally advanced. By the age of 11, this gap emerges. By the age of 16, you've got a huge gap. So I would focus on what happens in primary school, because it's often too late to sort it out at secondary school. But I would also have targets for secondary school, because what's happening in secondary school, again, is this culture of low expectations of black children. And we get shuffled off to the bottom end of the university table, if at all, right? And you know, so I think you have to start quite young. You have to focus on the schools. You have to set them targets, and you have to set the secondary school targets. But also you have to talk to universities. You have to talk to universities who seem quite complacent about the differential. Just think, in London, you have a whole bunch of universities all quite close together. You go to LSE, right? You know, the BME people at LSE are all rich people from overseas. You go to the University of, what do they call it now, South Bank? Completely different demographic. That's not fair. That's not right. So it's about this. It's about primary schools, and it's about the encouragement and the support that teachers give black children to achieve. I mean, I run an awards programme for London's top achieving black children. We see brilliant black children. We see, you know, children with 11 A stars at GCSE, or regular black children at regular state schools. So I think you have to start young. You have to focus on standards, and then we will be able to access high quality higher education as a matter of right.
One of the points of the question was in terms of the amount of schools and the infrastructure. There are more people coming in, the birth rate is increasing over time. How can we...
Yeah, well, you know, this whole birth rate thing, we're a small island, too many people can get carried away with that, right? There's always an issue in London that they're basically young populations, and they're running to keep ahead of the growth of the population in terms of building schools. But I don't think there's a problem necessarily about building the schools. I don't think that this overcrowding thing is the real issue. The real issue is black children being written off by age 11. I think that's the real issue. I think that the schools can be built, you know, if the will is there. That's what I think.
It does seem to be that this sort. I know, Ivan, it is Ivan, right? The sort of, I don't know, your presentation sounded very much attacking of a party, which is the Conservative Party, and the idea that you kind of came here and attacking them presents to us that there's only one other option, which is the Labour Party. So your point about black people and ethnic minorities having power, in quotes, I don't quite believe that, because they've been forced to vote for one party based on what we've been hearing here and based on what has been said. It is true that we've been forced to sort of rely on one party as the solution centre, the solving sort of embodiment that we should sort of run to. And it prevents us from sort of thinking freely about politicians, thinking about their policies, thinking about their viewpoints, rather than just running to one party, which may not be.
Listen to me. I gave you an award, so you must now listen to me, right? Listen to me. Look, I didn't get up here and say everyone's got to vote Labour. I never do that. No one's seen me do that for 20 odd years, right? People must judge. And I say to use your vote. That's the one thing I always say. Use your vote. So judge the parties and use your vote. That's all I say to you. But you said people forced to vote for the Labour Party. What's it? You're a medical student, aren't you? Yes. So you've never studied politics or history? Sorry? You've never really studied politics or history? Well then, no, let me tell you. Do you know what it was like? Do you know what it was like to try and join the Conservative Party in the 50s and 60s. No.
Wait.
Let me just finish. It is completely untrue to say that people of colour have ever been forced to join a political party. They have... No, let me just finish. It is completely untrue. I know of nothing that ever went on like that. It is true that a number of people of colour do vote for the Labour Party, possibly Liberals, right? But there's a reason for that. It's partly that if you come from the Caribbean, for instance, all of the major post or pre-independence political parties in the Caribbean, Jamaica, Trinidad, Grenada, and so on, all of those parties which fought for independence and got independence in the 60s, they were based on the sugar unions. And therefore, people from the Caribbean naturally had an affinity with the Labour Party because their politics came out of organised trade unionism. That's the first thing. In Africa, the reason why some Africans came here and voted Labour, because when those countries were fighting for independence, who was standing with their leaders? It wasn't the Conservative Party. So all I'm saying to you is, I don't come here and force anyone to join any political party. That's not what I do. There is nothing in the history of politics in this country that says that anyone is forced to join a party. There are reasons why different ethnic groups have joined a political party, and all I say to you is don't take what any politician tells you. You're a very bright boy, I gave you an award. Read and understand and vote, in the way you want to vote. But don't talk foolishness about anyone, put chains on people and drag them to vote Labour, because that never happened.
Yeah. To be honest, as much as I personally dislike the politics of conservatism to my fingertips, I really welcome and I actually encourage people to get involved in the Conservative Party. And the reason is simple, really, as far as I can see, is that we need to have people in every political party so that all political parties change from within. And, if you look at the Republicans, are going in America, but they have black activists there who, we had this guy called Herman Cain that recently put himself up to be the Republican nominee for president. Didn't get through, but he got quite close. And I think really that the more of us which are actually in all three political parties, the more we can actually get into a virtuous circle where the parties are actually competing against each other for the black vote. And that is the ideal situation there.
I have lived around the country and I have seen different systems of education, from living in Egypt and from living in Pakistan, being to Canada and Sweden and the UK. The thing I want to ask you, why is the UK education system much more difficult than going to Pakistan or Egypt? Whereas, for instance, you put your money down, you get taught your GCSE within 1 year or so. Why are they making it so long? And the other hand is, how come we call it Black History Month, whereas it should be really incorporated into the curriculum, whether you're in secondary or primary school, it should be in everywhere. And it should be really something that is taught throughout the year.
Personally, I quite like Black History Month because events are put on and things happen which I enjoy. And it does force institutions to address the issue of Black history. Ideally, we'd have these events all year round, but in practice, we don't. So I like Black History Month, I enjoy going to Black History Month events, and I would defend it.
I was actually involved in a recent campaign to make sure that Mary Seacole and Olado Equiano stayed on the national curriculum. And because Michael Gove, the Education Secretary, wanted to take that out. Now, what we did is we actually set up a petition, and within about 2 or 3 weeks, we had 36,000 signatures on that petition. It was real people power. And Michael Gove had no option but to give in. Now, some people say, well, Michael Gove is an ideologue and he would never change his mind. But when he saw people power, he had to change his mind. He had to acknowledge that the curriculum is not just for dead old white men. These things can change, and we've got we're in a new era now. When I was growing up, we never had social media. When I was growing up, Diane and Bernie Grant and Paul Boateng and Keith Vaz weren't elected. They were only elected when I was sort of 16 17 years old. So right before that time, there were no black politicians at all.
My question really goes back to the root of the discussion as to why black students don't really enter into politics and why we don't prosper. And my view is, I'm speaking purely for myself, not for everyone else, but it boils down to the fact that we never get told we can go into politics. And you're in secondary school, you're in primary school, and politics is not one of those things that it's been like said to you from like the very get-go, saying to you, you can do this, you can do that. It's not accessible to us. And what, is it Kwasi? He said when he first came and was this, he said to us, don't feel as though you can't come in and you can't get involved into politics because you can. And I feel like in a lot of schools, in black areas, not necessarily black areas, low-income areas, you don't get told enough that you can enter into politics. You don't get told enough that, oh, this is what you need to do to get to this place. And I feel as though when you do get told, it's when you're in university and when you're in a red brick uni. And as we've established before, a lot of black and ethnic minority students and lower income students, let's not like bring the whole ethnic thing into it, but lower income students don't really get into red brick universities. We tend to be at the lower brackets. And in those unis, we don't get to network as much. We don't get to see as many people. We don't get as much opportunities. And we don't even have the entry requirements for most of these jobs anyway. So what I'm trying to say is, what are you doing for people like myself to say to you, do you know what, get into politics, get involved, I don't know, become your young mayor or whatever it is. Like, what are you actually, what can we do to actually make our voices heard other than vote? Like, what can we do? How can we get involved?
I have to tell you, nobody told me to go into politics either. In fact, they told me the absolute opposite. They told me I couldn't go to Oxbridge. They told me I couldn't be a graduate trainee in the civil service. They told me I couldn't work in television. The truth is that the society will not necessarily tell people like you and me what we can do and what is available. That's the first thing. Because I think it's true, there's a whole group of us that came in 20 odd years ago. There was Bernie Grant, there was Paul Buttigieg and Keith Bowers, and I think all of us would say, no one told us how to get into politics. That's the first thing. The second thing is, I'm slightly wary of people that want to go into politics because they see it's a profession. You put a suit, you go on Newsnight, you chat foolishness. What I would urge people to do is to get involved in their community, whether it's through your church or going into a school and reading to children. That, to me, is the important first step, engaging with the community. If you want to turn that into a career in politics, that's fine. But what I think is more important is that we as black people engage with our community by whatever means we can, and don't forget where we came from. And you think people aren't telling you to go into politics? People wanted me to be a nurse, man. People wanted to be a nurse like my mother. No one said to me you could be an MP. I read the book. I was at uni. I see white people who think they can be politicians, and I thought, well, why not me? That's all it was. I always remember when I was first selected for Hackney, North Stoke, Newington, it was 1986, and all these journalists came to see me, and they were so shocked that a black woman was running for MP. And they kept saying to me, what made you want to become an MP? What made you want to become an MP? And then finally, one white journalist, woman journalist, came to see me, and she said, you know, I know why you did it, she said. She said, when you're working class, and you go to a good university, all your life, you see a hurdle, and you take it. And sometimes there are not the people to help you over the hurdle. But you have to be prepared, to use a biblical phrase, to draw a bow at a venture. You have to be prepared to take a chance. If I had waited for people to tell me to go to Cambridge, for people to tell me to go into politics, I would be in a tower block today, minding my grand picnic.
To be fair, I don't think a lot of us wait for people to tell us stuff. No, people don't tell us that we can get into politics, but for us to get into university and go through all the struggles that we had to get through, that in itself is an achievement. But I don't feel that a lot of, people in like higher positions in companies and politicians take that into consideration when they look at people like us. That's the point I'm trying to make.
No, I agree with you. That's why for nearly 10 years I've run an awards programme to try and raise the profile of black children that achieve, try to get them mentoring. Just because you don't read about it doesn't mean people aren't going to try to do things. But you do have to bear in mind that in the end is you. It's not waiting for someone to say, yes, Diane, you can be the MP for Hackney. It's saying, yeah, you know, I can do it.
I think that's absolutely true, that, the people who are told or encouraged to get involved in politics are the people who've got the connections, from upper middle class families, and their fathers and their grandfathers and whatever are all involved in high society. But like Diane, nobody told me to get involved in politics. But I think that now that we have moved forward, now that we have black MPs, now that we have black councillors like myself, we are in a position now to tell and to encourage people to get involved in politics that didn't happen before. And just the fact that we have this black representation now, I think actually should be an encouragement to you all to consider some involvement in politics. And there's lots of different routes as well. You can have the elected office, but you can also have the backroom staff, you can have civil services as part of politics as well. There's a whole range of different areas, specialist advisors on the subject matters that really you feel passionate about. There's so many reasons. There are 1,001 reasons to be involved in politics in some way, and now is the time, I think, to be thinking about it.
I agree with a lot of what you said. I think I got your point where you talked about how, particularly there's just when you go to certain schools, there'll be a careers fair which will tell you what jobs you can get in the area, and then other schools you'll have what universities you're going to go to, or Oxford and Cambridge will be knocking around going, oh, we want some of your students. And I think that's just kind of, to me, it talks about an education system that is elitist, that favours certain groups of people with connections, people that understand how it works. When I had to sit at home and work out for hours how to fill out my UCAS form, I couldn't ask any of my family members because none of them had been to university. Little did I know as well that when if I even wanted to go to Oxford and Cambridge, I'd missed the application deadline by months and months and months, because they're the only two institutions that actually operate on a different admission system still to all the rest of the universities in the country. So already I was cut out because I didn't know how that worked. So I completely agree with you. I think there are a lot of inequalities in the education system. Not much, obviously, the massive amounts of debt that does put many people off, and also the cutting of vital support. So I totally agree with a lot of what you're saying there. I do think there's this thing though about kind of, okay, it's really good to have black representation, but actually what is the point of having people in Parliament if they're not actually standing up for black people and black communities? And I think, all credit to Diane. For many, many years now, since she's been elected, she has actually been the one, as an ally of, completely, still of, black community. She's not moved to some other place. She still lives in the area that she represents. She still is in touch with her community, still runs surgeries, and, does all she can. And she's always on the television being bombarded with kind of, what is actually racist abuse. She's singled out as kind of like, some mouthy, woman, and that is a lot of it as well. Sexism comes into massively just because she dares speaks out on the issues that affect her and the people that she represents. So, all power to her for doing that. Because there is a question about, it's all well and good having black faces in high places, but what are they actually doing to improve the standards of the people, the living conditions of the people that elected them?
Anytime we bring problems to the House, they don't solve it. They repeat the same thing every time, every year. We are going through problems. They don't look into it. Because myself, right now, I'm supposed to go back to college. They are telling me I can't go back because my paper is still at home office. And I got 2 kids as well. Teachers are bringing racists to school as well. My children, they are being abused in school as well by the teachers. These things, I don't think you politicians are looking into it. I don't think so. You people are looking into it. Because I believe most of you are doing job for your own selfish interest. I'm very sorry. I'm very sorry about that. And again, secondly, it goes to, it goes to you. Yesterday we came out for bringing the bills down. I was involved as well. But to my surprise, we didn't see many black people out there. It's just almost like 20 of us there. If we continue like this, how are they going to listen to us? Because if they pass this bill, it's going to affect we blacks. Because you people who are up there, please don't forget that you got young ones behind you.
Madam, you want to come to my office and see the letters. There are 650 MPs. I'm regularly in the top 10 of MPs for writing to immigration nationality about immigration. Immigration was the first thing I spoke about when I came into Parliament in 1987, and last night I was speaking about the bill. I made all the points you will have heard about that bill. I was on the floor of the House making that speech. So just because, you see, what you will have to remember is the media will only print bad things about black people. So just because you don't hear about politicians taking up issues in relation to immigration doesn't mean to say that some of us aren't doing it. As I say, I have fight. There's a woman that said, I don't do anything. You need to come to my office, madam, and talk to my staff day in, day out with an open advice surgery on a Friday. So don't tell me I don't do anything around immigration issues, because that's always been my bread and butter. That's what I'd say about that. And what did she say? Politicians don't solve problems. Listen, look, I was a big critic of my own Labour government. We went to war in Iraq, which I thought was a bad thing, okay? We introduced tuition fees, albeit at a lower figure, and I voted against it, it was a big thing. But I thought it was a bad thing. But guess what? The Labour government did make a difference, for goodness sake. We had the educational maintenance allowance. In Hackney, we built 5 new academies. We put money into schools. Don't say that politicians never solve problems. We don't solve every problem, either as an individual or as a government. But let me tell you, if you really knew, where do you live? Deadford. Listen, man, if you knew what Deadford was like under the Conservative government in the 80s, you would understand that despite all the problems with Tony Blair and so forth, what we were able to do for Deptford. And if you have a problem, if you have an immigration problem, your MP is Joan Rodder. Yeah. So have you been to Joan?
Yeah, she's helping me out.
Precisely, so why are you coming around cost politics and saying no one is helping? This is what gets me. You come here because I know Joan. She's a good woman. Like, not all politicians are bad. She's a good woman, and if you have a problem, she will try and help you.
It's not everybody that is bold enough to go to their MPs.
Yeah, but don't come here and cost politicians. You're costing politicians. Don't come here and do it, because Joan's a good woman. She's not perfect, but she's a good woman, and I'm sure she's helping you the best way she can. Politicians aren't perfect. And black politicians particularly, we never get publicity when we're doing good things. But please don't believe that some of us aren't working away behind the scenes on some of these issues, because that's not fair.
I actually feel that there's 2 ways of looking at politics, okay? I think there's the way that you look at it to say it's a career. This is the greasy pole, this is the direction of travel, this is the ladder, and I want to get up there, and I will kick whoever else I can, kick off the ladder in order to get there. And there are those politicians, who I say Diane is a good example, who actually are part of a movement and actually don't see it themselves as an individual, but see themselves as actually part of a community, part of a political movement in the political spectrum. And that's how I see myself. I come from a background of being involved in anti-racist activity, and anti-fascist activity as well. And there's no way on earth that if I ever get elected to a place like this, I'm sure some of you will get elected to a place like this at some point. But there's no way that I'm going to actually not be accountable to the community. It's just not something which I can do. So I would encourage people to actually see politics as actually not an individual thing that I'm going to be sort of famous and I'm going to have the power, but to say that I want to get there for a particular reason. I want to get there because I want to achieve these things for the people I represent, and that I want to have everybody to share in that success as well, which I think is really important.
The Antonio Gramsci theory suggests that whatever is portrayed by the media is filtered and then it's given to the audience, the readers, which is us. So what I've heard from your points is that now we're gathering a community which is much stronger than ever before. What exactly are we going to do for our media sector? How are we going to portray ourselves? Because things like the Mobile Awards, it's on BBC 3, when I think it should be on BBC 1, and it's a struggle to even get on BBC 3. We've got things like SBTV, which that's not even fundamental to the black community, if you understand what I mean. Those things there, that's what the middle class white male is looking for. So what are we going to do as professional people, as black Nubians, to get ourselves out there even more, to make sure that when we go onto the media, it's not slang that we're coming with. When we use politics, like you're saying here, as soon as we step out the door, what are we going to do? How are we going to combat it?
I totally agree. I think the only real portrayals, unfortunately, of black people in the media is either on Crime Watch or on the news. And I don't think you get a completely distorted view of actually black communities. Whenever you open a newspaper, there's a story about violence, gangs. I picked up the Evening Standard yesterday and saw a thing about London to introduce a gang czar, someone to look at the problem of gangs gangs, and obviously we know who they're talking about when they talk about gangs. And I just thought, well, and I kind of thought, me being funny as I am, I thought, well, when are they ever going to bring in an investigation, obviously, into the biggest organised gang in London, the Metropolitan Police? Surprisingly, I don't think they're going to do that, however, but I totally agree, and I think that we have to support kind of community, black-led media in this. Obviously, there's a big problem. Choice FM, they shut that down. They're doing many things, cutting funding to a lot of the projects that we rely on to get our community and culture out there, and that's a shame. That has to be fought against head on.
I've actually worked in the black media for quite some time and was editor of New Nation newspaper, which is no longer going, unfortunately, and the point about Mobos was made as well. I'm not going to give my views on Mobos because I don't think it's that fantastic. But in terms of representing, seeing black people represented fairly, it's not just for me a case of having a vibrant black press, although I think that we do need that. It's also about representation within the national media. Now, the problem that I see is that, and I work for the national media, I work for The Guardian and one or two other places, is that it's a very, very exclusive club, and it's very, very hard to get into the national media. In many ways, actually, the national media has worse employment practices when it comes to the transparency of the hiring and the promotion and the recruitment and the retention of black journalists than any other walk of life, even though it's the media that's supposed to be holding all these other walks of life to account. So we need to be putting a very harsh spotlight on the way in which the media actually operate, because at the moment they're not operating in a good way. So until we actually get a critical mass of black journalists in the national newspapers, we are going to continue to see misrepresentation. I mean, just 2 years ago with the London riots after the shooting of Mark Duggan, I mean, race wasn't mentioned explicitly, but actually the image was fostered in some ways that the people who were doing the rioting were largely black youth. Now, that wasn't necessarily the case on the streets, but these are some of the things that we need to that we need to change. So yes, we do need a good black media, but we're only going to get a good black media actually if we buy into the products which are actually offered. The Voice newspaper is struggling. New Nation is no longer in existence. Choice FM sold out long time ago to Capital Radio, and now it's become something else entirely. We're never going to see that again. We've got to fight for those opportunities to have a black press which is representing the community in the way that we like. But at the same time, I think we also need to fight for proper representation within the national media itself.
So you speak about issues, you throw statistics, but the question is, are you hitting that charity begins at home, the mentality of blacks, that a lot of blacks have quite a defeatist mentality, that we don't feel we can achieve to anything, that we don't feel we can amount to everything. It takes someone in every different era to aspire to better. It takes one person or a few people to come together for us to have a change. Are you looking at that? Are we not looking at having more leaders spread out across the country, across the world, to try and influence a bigger change, not just here, all over the world?
I think that we have to always be international. You have to remember, obviously, we're in Britain, but there's a whole world out there, and we can play a role in deciding exactly what what our government does, whether that's in terms of cutting international funding, aid to projects, whether it's going around bombing people, killing people, invading Africa. Like, those are the things that we have to keep higher on our agenda and actually speak out. I remember there was much outrage when obviously the government decided to spend money just after it had cut things like EMA, treble tuition fees. It then went to war in Libya, starting invading Africa again. And I think if we're out here, part of the anti-war movement, saying, what are you doing? Why are you bombing Africa and you're not investing money in public services over here that we all rely on and we need? And I think that's one of the issues that we should focus on.
These events often happen in London. I'm on my Twitter, I always see them going on. Now, nothing happens around Nottingham to do with black people. And furthermore, because we come from a lower socio-economic background, we can't always afford to come to these events. And I feel that's a big reason as to why black people aren't so participating in politics, because, there are black people outside of London. Furthermore, bear with me, politics is very London-focused in the sense that whatever happens in London then affects Nottingham. So I feel like, what could you guys do to ensure that parts of the country that aren't London also get their fair representation politically.
I completely understand. Obviously, a lot of things are in London. You know, London is, you know, the seat of power in Britain. So it's understandable. This is where Parliament is. This is where, you know, all the big kind of media stations are. And this is where the majority of black people live in Britain. It's a diverse, multicultural city, and it's all the better for it. I would say to definitely check out the Black Students campaign and network that you have got at Nottingham University. I'm pretty sure they'd be happy to have you involved.
In the curriculum, from when I was growing up, we weren't taught to, you know, go for your dreams and what's your purpose in life. And I'm wondering, why is it not taught in the curriculum where we're being taught, okay, we should do trigonometry, we should do Pythagoras theorem. I asked my teacher, I'm not going to do that in my future life, where I want to go. I'm not going to measure things. And he was saying, well, in the future, you might want to measure a tree, and Pythagoras theorem would help you. And I said, that's not going to help me. But, you know, and I know a guy who gets straight A's and everything. In his GCSEs, he had to do DT. He said he didn't like it. He never turned up to lessons, and he failed it. But he's a straight A-star student. So why isn't purpose being taught in curriculum? Why isn't chasing your dreams being taught in the curriculum?
I think that there's an issue as well with the way that the curriculum is. I think that it's a one-size-fits-all approach, but it doesn't actually necessarily reflect at all the diversity of the people that it's trying to teach and educate. So, that, you know, there is a, you know, it was a fantastic campaign. We're really proud to work with Lester, Diane, loads of other people, you know, on it in terms of black history. But the fact is that, you know, Mary Seacole and Lido Equinel are on there. That's two people. Like, where's the rest of, like, you know, black people in history completely written out? You know, and in fact, they were never written in the first place. So I think that is something we have to fight for, to actually have a curriculum that represents Britain as it is, modern Britain and its history. And I agree. I think that, you know, black people, wherever they are, you know, for example, I have massive disagreements with, you know, with many people on these, you know, in the Commons as we speak. But I think you have to have black unity when it comes to the issue of people facing racism, because it doesn't matter what kind of colour beret you walk around in, you will always face discrimination based on the colour of your skin. I think you have to have unity there. But that doesn't mean that we're silent when people, you know, who look like us, come from our backgrounds, go into Parliament, go into the local council and do things that explicitly attack our communities. I think we have to be very clear exactly what we stand for then. Call them out on it.
We had, you know, the Pan-Africanist movement in Africa and the whole movement to end colonialism. That's on the curriculum as well. So we've got Kwame Nkrumah, you know, we've got Patrice Lumumba, and many others on the curriculum. The Windrush generation is on the curriculum as well. So there are quite a few good things. What isn't on the curriculum is the African history prior to the arrival of the Europeans. That's the big thing. Which obviously, you know, is quite often a focus in Black History Month, about the glory of Africa, about the black presence in Britain going back, you know, well beyond Windrush to, you know, to the time of Christ and before. So that's something which is missing, and that's something which I think is the next stage that we need to campaign for.
What do you guys think is the greatest problem with bringing young black people into politics? I'm just going to give you my view. I think the greatest problem is probably unity. When young black people or any sort of black people get involved in any sort of like opportunist sort of opportunity, they feel like they're going to take on the world and not support their community. And I think that's the greatest problem. And I think if, I remember going to the conference and Chaka was talking about how different politicians helped him out. Diane helped him out. Dawn Butler helped him out. And Dawn Butler's actually helping me out right now because she said, whenever I have a problem, just give me a call. And I think that's the greatest problem with this, is that we don't unify.
I think it's a really vexed issue, but you know what I'm not going to do, which some people do, is to say, oh, you know, we aren't united as a community, and you know that is just something that is holding us back. There is always this lack of unity, but actually I think at the same time, you know, we need to understand what's going on. You know, that actually there is certain behaviour patterns which have been transmitted from generation to generation, which is not necessarily the fault of the black community. It's the fault of the way in which you know, divide and rule has operated for you know, as long as we can remember. I mean, Diane Abbott actually got criticised for sending out a tweet about a year ago or so, saying that you know, politicians were playing divide and rule tactics. And she got criticised for it, but actually she was telling the truth. Divide and rule is something which has existed from the time in which Europeans first arrived in Africa to the way in which politics is conducted in offices and in the corridors of power. And, you know, black politicians and you know, black professionals anywhere in a largely white environment are generally made to feel that in order to fit in, you've got to conform to certain norms, you've got to conform to certain behaviours. And a byproduct of that is to not associate with other black people or to you know, encourage them along. What tends to happen is that the drawbridge is pulled up, the ladder is pulled up, and you know, you are then at the mercy of the patronage that the white people with power at the top give you. And when they take away that, then you are left with nothing. So I think that we need to understand, you know, behaviours and actually look at it. Not to blame the community in particular, but to actually look at, you know, who's really responsible for that.
Coming from a West Indian background, and this is sort of a common theme throughout most black communities, there's a complete apathy towards politics a lot of the time. So for somebody like yourself who stepped out and chose to go down the political route, did you face backlash, whether, you know, in whatever form, in terms of a negative approach, a negative attitude to your stance to want to do that? And if you did, how did you combat it to sort of change people's minds and to get people thinking a bit outside the box that we don't have to be apathetic towards the political process?
No, I didn't really. I mean, people just looked at me as an oddity, really, because I mean, I grew up in a working class estate. My family were very poor, but actually my mother, who came over from Zimbabwe, even though she came over very poor, she was brought up with actually middle class values. And my dad was, you know, also, I guess, became working class, but his family were middle class. So in many ways, some of the values that came through to me, even though I was actually grew up in a very rough estate, were probably different from some of the other people, you know, in that estate, black and white. So I didn't really face that backlash, but I think that you know, the other point was about apathy, and that, you know, we're apathetic about politics. And I think to a certain extent that's been addressed by some of the other sort of answers and questions that we've heard today. But yes, we can be apathetic, but when we look at the world outside, everything that we look at tells us there's every reason not to be apathetic. Black youth unemployment is running at 54%. Over half of all black youth are unemployed today, which is just, you know, unbelievable. These are issues that we need to not be apathetic and you know, get involved in politics.